As we start preparing for BIBA Conference 2024, we've been reflecting on everyone that attends and how, as an industry, we've embraced diversity, equality and inclusion. In this mini-series of the BIBA Pod, we'll recognise not only how far the insurance industry has come, but also what else we can do. Join us as we delve into our guests' valuable insights and stories. It's great to have you both on BIBA Pod. Really interesting conversation coming. We're talking around diversity and inclusion, which is the topic of this mini-series. I wonder if we can start just by having a little background. Bal, can you tell me who you are and kind of where you work and what your background is?
So I think the first thing you probably want to know about me is where I'm from. And I'm not a Londoner. I'm a West Midlands girl. I'm very proud to say I was born and brought up in Wolverhampton, which is a little town not far from Birmingham. I'm a first generation British Indian. So both my parents emigrated from the Punjab, which is in India, as young adults. And really, from a career perspective, again, this won't be a surprise. I didn't start in insurance. I started with tech companies, having done a degree in business and information systems. So I worked with the financial sector. I worked with banks and insurance companies, but more from a third-party supplier point of view. So I'd work and concentrate on automating manual processes, delivering tools for an efficient workflow. And then from that, I guess I sort of got into insurance. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then in my free time, I do a lot of efforts in the inclusion and diversity space. So I'm part of iCAN. I also co-chair our multicultural group at Axa XL. So that's me.
Fabulous. I'm looking forward to hearing a lot more about it. Sounds very exciting. Enam, can you give me your background and where you are at the moment?
I'm probably in a similar sort of approach as Bal. First generation. I'm a British Bangladeshi. Not from the Midlands. I'm from up north, as we say,
Up north.
Manchester. Up north. So my sort of expertise has largely been in the insurance and reinsurance field. I don't think like anybody is any different when it comes to this, but I sort of fell into insurance. I did a accountancy as my academia. Summertime came and I was looking for a job, fell into the world of marine insurance, had no idea what it was. All I knew was boats, and fell into it, and I was mesmerized by the field. And I was very lucky. I had a couple of very interesting individuals in my early career, gave me opportunities to get involved in projects. And next thing you know, 18 years down the line, I'm still here. I've set up my own little one-man band consultancy, and I largely deal with reinsurance clients as well as in my sort of background point of view. I'm involved in quite a few diversity inclusivity work streams beyond just the insurance field. I'm an ambassador for a couple of secondary schools and universities around Manchester, just to increase awareness around different opportunities within the insurance world, which I'm really intrigued to share with you guys today. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
I think it's fabulous. I'm interested to hear about what you're doing from a secondary school perspective, because there's a lot of talk about that in the industry now, and I think it's a great initiative. So you've both kind of mentioned, you've said you fell into insurance. Bal, you're a little bit less cryptic about, a little bit more cryptic about whether you fell or chose insurance. What led you to pursue a career in insurance? Like what? And if it was a case like with you, Enam, where you fell into it, what made you stay?
So it was really interesting because as a third party supplier, I was working for a tech company, but I was always in and out of insurance companies and banks, predominantly banks. And I could see so many opportunities. My background isn't in a traditional underwriting skill. My background is around change, transformations, and using IT to deliver those changes. So it was really as simple as once I started to think about my next career move, as you do after every few years, I started putting some feelers out there. And the first company that called me for an interview was an insurance company. And that experience I had in that interview was quite eye-opening because I walked in thinking they're not going to hire me. I don't have any of the skills that underwriters have, very traditional view. And it was a real eye-opener, because what they were looking for was somebody who could take lots of different moving parts and different expertise and bring them together to actually deliver a change in the organization. And that's what I love. I love bringing people, processes, I love bringing a solution together. So it just felt like the perfect fit. And I think that's quite interesting, because a lot of people I talk to, or when I talk about insurance, they still have a bit of a traditional view. So I spend a lot of my time saying, well, no, I'm not an underwriter. I didn't come from a technical background, but there's so many different opportunities and different spaces to work within the insurance sector. And my experience has shown that, I feel, over the last sort of 15 plus years as I've been in insurance, I've had a different role pretty much every 3 or 4 years, um, which is excellent for me, because I get bored quickly, so I like to move around.
I think that's one of the key things that people outside of the industry don't know about the industry, is how much variety there is in the insurance industry. I think it's phenomenal. What about you, Enam?
To be fair, again, it's going to be very reflective of what Bal mentioned and Sarah mentioned about the variety. When I fell into insurance, like I said, it was a part-time job. I came in, and at a very early stage, I had individuals who were very keen to get me involved in projects. Bearing in mind, I've just come into the company, I'm fairly new, I was very young. And these sort of projects gave me insight around the wider sort of view and portfolio view of insurance and reinsurance and the wider market. And I was mesmerized as a young adult. I looked at everything and I felt it's a field in which I knew I could sort of excel in, because it was reflective of a lot of my skill set and also an ability to grow in my strength. I traveled a lot in my early years of career, which I wanted to do. I met people. I was going to all these very fancy events, and I was starstruck to a large sort of point of view of it. And like I said, next thing you know, 15, 18 years down the line, and I'm still here, and I'm involved in all sorts. At first, I was just sort of listening to Bal, and she mentioned 15 years in insurance. First of all, we need to ask and double check that. I'm not sure I agree if you've done 15 years already, Bal, but we'll accept it. Um, and I guess it's that same reflection. It's just you fell into it, you jump between one project, one different role to another role, and next thing you know, you're here.
It sounds like both of you have had some sort of mentorship, whether you call it that or not, but some people in your early career that really backed you and really kind of gave you opportunities. Bal, you mentioned you thought you'd never get the role that you got. You've mentioned having some people at the very start of your career. How important is that in the insurance industry for people starting? And I'm not necessarily talking about from a diversity and inclusion perspective, I'm talking about from a young professional perspective.
Yeah, it's imperative. I'm a advocate when it comes to mentorship and the sort of benefit it brings. Just to put it into context, with the iCAN, I joined the iCAN, the Insurance Culture and Awareness Network, largely because of their campaign around mentorship and the mentor program. Some of the stuff I do with the schools and universities is more of a mentorship. So for me, I've seen the benefits, and what I mean by that is when I first started off, knowing what to do, where to look, has always been time savers. It streamlined my ability to develop, and that's what mentorship is in many ways for me. Is someone who's experienced, who's done it, gives you those little sort of guidance and little nudges so that you head towards the right way. Because when you start off in any field, it is a minefield. There's so much going on. There's so many different personalities, so many things to learn. Where do you focus? Where do you apply your best intentions? And a mentorship is one of those sort of opportunities that gives you that guidance. So I'm a big advocate for it, and I do think it has a large place for anybody, whether it's junior, mid-level, or even senior level. I learn so much from my mentees. It's unbelievable, and I always say thank you to them, because they give me an insight into a field which maybe I'm a bit complacent about, because I'm experienced, I'm a veteran in the field.
Just to echo that, mentorship, I think, is important in every walk of life, at every level of life, because there's always somebody that's done it and can sort of impart wisdom. So I totally agree with you on that. Bal, what have you got? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with Enam. It's such an important part of building your career in those early stages. And let's be honest, it can be quite a lonely place and quite a scary place when you come into an industry. I mean, I came into the industry having had a few years in the IT space. It was still a scary space. It was a breadth of information. There weren't that many people that looked like me 10 plus years ago when I came into the industry. So that was a scary place. And then, coming from a cultural background where traditionally, we wouldn't challenge our elders, there's a hierarchy in the families, we wouldn't really speak up, you'd respect those elders. That sort of translates into your professional career. And you don't know that until a mentor or somebody you're being coached by brings that to light for you, because it's a bit of a blind spot, and it certainly was for me. I thought, keep my head down, work hard, I will get the recognition and I'll get those promotions. It's actually, yes, that's part of it, but a big part of it is, having a brand for yourself, being able to speak up. And I think being able to do those things doesn't come naturally for a lot of people. It didn't for me, for example. So from that perspective, having a mentor and a coach was hugely valuable for me. And that wasn't just at the start of my career, that was sort of midway through, essentially. So I don't think you have to be at the beginning, the middle, or a veteran in your career. I think a mentor is really key at any point in your career.
I really love that. Having somebody more experienced, but also somebody that's from a similar cultural background, to highlight those blind spots, because everybody has them. And you kind of grow up thinking that this is the direction. And it's so interesting when someone goes, just left a bit, left a bit, left a bit. There you go. Both of you are doing a phenomenal job in the industry, and you're both known advocates for diversity. You've mentioned a couple of experiences. Have you had any experiences maybe that were more challenging, or maybe that you really learnt something about yourself or about the industry since you've been in?
I can probably start. So I think let me just say, in the last sort of 10 years, or more closely in the last 3 years, I think we have made progress as an industry towards inclusion and diversity. Um, and I've seen that firsthand. 3 years ago, following the murder of George Floyd, myself and a few colleagues got together, and we couldn't really see a space or a community within the organisation that supported ethnic minorities or had a multicultural group. So for me, that was key. I just thought, why are we still seeing this kind of equality? And I think George Floyd really brought that into focus. It affected many of us in different ways. And I think for me, it galvanized me to have a very difficult and uncomfortable conversation in the organization to say, look, I don't want to be a part of this inequality. I want to be part of a movement that drives action and tangible action. Um, and that led me and three other colleagues to go speak to our CEO and sort of put this proposition to him to create a multicultural group. And I've got to say, he was super supportive. Straight away he got it. I know that's not always the case. There's a lot more conversations that need to happen. And so that was really the first sort of starting point, creating that group. I think what followed was then a series of very difficult conversations, because this is a really hard topic to talk about. And, a lot of us have had lived experiences that maybe haven't been as positive, either in our childhood or through our careers. And then recounting those and bringing those to the surface can be quite painful. And also, from a personal experience, it's exhausting. You're doing this work on the side of your desk, you're passionate about it, but also reliving some of those experiences to help somebody else understand or bring them on the journey as to why we need to do this work can be really exhausting. And I think that's a separate thing that we need to keep one eye on, which is the wellness and the mental wellness of our colleagues who are doing this kind of work. But I think to answer your question, largely for me, the experience has been positive. And we were able to produce a multicultural group with the support of our senior leadership team. And I think from that, we were very, very clear that we wanted to have tangible action driven out of that group. We used to laugh and we used to say, our group's not about samosas and jollof rice. I love both of those things, by the way. But we wanted the group to go a little bit further than a community where we came together and we discussed, any issues or any thoughts that we had about whether the industry was moving forwards and our company was moving forwards. So we quickly put together three key missions for our group. The first one was we've got to be goal congruent throughout the whole company. So we've got to make sure that I&D is just as strategic as any other business goal we would have, and we should treat it as such. So if that's a business goal that's set at the top of the organization, it should be in everybody's goals, as it is for all the other things that we're trying to drive in the organization. And then the other two areas were, one was around metrics and data. You'll hear me talk about this a lot because I'm huge about measuring where we are. Well, first understanding what the landscape looks like, measuring how we're doing against it, but then really setting targets, because there's no other way that you can really measure the change. Otherwise, you sort of keep spinning and you keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you're not really clear on how much we're moving the needle. And then the third part for us was about how we engage in our community. What do all our processes look like, from hiring to development to policies and procedures? Where can we see maybe we're not being inclusive? So that's a long way to answer your question, Sarah. Sorry, I got into it there.
There's no apology for that. That is it. It's incredible what you've done, and I think you are absolutely like on the nail to be saying that we need to make sure that we're looking at the wellness and the sort of mental well-being of people involved in being the disruptors, because it's a heavy burden to carry. Like you say, it brings a lot of personal passion and emotion with it, and it's not easy. It is not easy having some of those conversations, and you don't always get an open door. Enam, have you got, what would you like to add to that?
I think if I sort of approach it on the basis that I probably have come into the insurance via the traditional route, I did claims, I did the underwriting, sort of the more core primary tasks of an insurance field. In my experience, when I think about it today, it wasn't great. And what I mean by that is when I started off, the norms and the expectations were not very welcoming, because you had even events and social events or gatherings which were very suitable for someone from my background, whether it's religiously or from a cultural background. There was a drinking culture, wasn't there, back in the days, when you thought about the lack of representation in the Lloyds market for women, let alone people from a paying background. And again, I agree with Bal. Over the past 10 years, things have progressed very well in that sense. Of course, we've seen more movement in the Lloyd's market when it comes to women. You see more cultural events for networking, etc. Even when you consider some of the events we've recently held with iCAN, even the Gen Z conference that we had recently, really is diverse in its state, rather than just from a BAME point of view, but purely from a generational level. So yes, there were challenges. It's getting better, but definitely more can be done.
Do you see in the changes you're seeing? Obviously, there's more happening in sort of a multicultural environment. Are there still channels of different cultures moving alongside, or are we getting more integrated across the piece? And what do you think needs to be done?
That's a great question.
Question that. It's a lovely question. Right. Some of the work I do with the schools and colleges and universities is one side of the argument. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of things we can do as an industry to make it diverse, make it inclusive. But I always say this to when I speak to students, we can decorate the door, but they need to come through the door. So how do we get them to come? So it's that perspective needs to be changed. We need to sort of showcase, not just from a cultural point of view, just as an industry point of view, perspective of what this business is and how it fits the demands of an individual. I know your question is more around the cultural point of view, but I think the one side of it is sort of linked in with both cultural and sort of the view perception of insurance within the market itself. Yes, and Bal will agree with me on this. We have cultural nuances that make us very different. Bal's from an Indian heritage. I'm from a Bangladeshi heritage, which once upon a time was India, then went to Pakistan, then went to Bangladesh. So that element of sort of history applies certain differences, which individually, from a traditional point of view, very strong-willed about. We're very opinionated about. But let's be honest with you, I think me and Bala, point first generation British, we could probably turn around and say it's very similar anyway. So we have our own challenges, let alone trying to imply it within the insurance market. What do you think, Bal?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And look, I often talk about these efforts being siloed. And I usually have this conversation within our company because we have a number of groups. We have the multicultural group, we have the pride group, we have the neurodiversity group, and we all do our own separate events. We do separate targets, we measure these things separately. And I think that's very similar to the industry, as Enam just said. We have different partner networks that focus on different cultures and different events. I think we need to do that to a certain extent, and we've been doing that really well for the last, 2-3 years. I've definitely seen an uptick in events internally and externally within our sector. I think where we can really unlock more change is the intersectionality. So if we join these things together, and that's not just different protected characteristics, but also the different ethnic groups, we'll be able to have almost like a multiplied effect because we'll be looking at, like you said, Enam, we'll be looking at those similarities because there are similarities there, even though we have our differences. And I think that's what we can capitalize on. I mean, there's an event coming up. iCAN are hosting a Diwali event I think it's at Gallagher's on the quick plug 7th of
Right.
November. And Diwali is a
Yeah.
great example because that's celebrated by 3 different faiths. It's, and that's a great way to showcase different ethnic minority groups coming together for the same celebration. And I think, that's an opportunity where we can bring these groups together, have the networking, and start these discussions on actually, we're more the same than we are different. And I think that's how we will unlock the next changes in the industry. And I think that's how we'll showcase that diversity and inclusion.
I probably would also add there is a sort of change in dynamics when it comes to the cultural side as well. For example, Bal and I are first generation, so we are in the limbo, as I say, between my friends, where one leg on the sort of Western side and then the other leg on our cultural responsibilities. But I have children, and I have nieces and nephews who are second, third generation, and they don't fully appreciate their cultural background because obviously their norms and values have been more Western. So as much as we talk about there's that cultural expectation and learning for the wider market, even within our own community, it's sort of not as prevalent as it used to be. So, there is that challenges that we have on this side, which, for example, Bal mentioned there's 3 religions that follow Diwali. I know what they are, but I know for a fact the next generation or so of people from my background, from a Muslim background or from a atheist background, won't have any idea. Having the opportunity to go in and understand that these events or these little sort of celebrations, which religion and which culture they refer to, and yes, coming back to it, we're all similar because fundamentally it's all around the same faith, same cultural norms and values.
Do you
Yeah.
know, I find it fascinating. I was interested in what you've both mentioned about the similarities within different minority groups. And actually, if we look across the piece, there's a lot of similarities. And I know you've mentioned different faiths, and I know, Bal, you mentioned different groups. And I love this idea that you've touched on about bringing each of those silos together, because at the end of the day, we're an industry about people. So we need to create an environment that fits for people. and people are different. Every single person is different. Bal, you've got some quite interesting stats, and you mentioned earlier that you are a data girl. Quite interesting stats around kind of workplace, who's in the workplace versus who's coming into the workplace. Can you talk us through some of that to highlight some of the points you guys have been making?
Yeah, pleasure. And look, the data doesn't lie. So I'm going to share first of all a report that the ABI did a couple of years ago, which was their talent and diversity research. And just as a headline, they looked at the executives within the insurance industry, and they compared what we have from a female point of view versus how many people are actually coming into the industry, so new joiners. So here's two stats. 24% of executives were female when they did this survey in 2021 versus 55% females entering the insurance industry at that time. So a significant gap there. And then also conversely, 2% of executives at the time were recorded to be from an ethnic minority versus 10% joining each year. So that was the picture 2 years ago. And if you remember, I talked about, I think there has been progress over the last, 2 to 3 years. Definitely when I walk around the company, when I walk around the industry, I can see a visible change. So just to compare that, CII released their equity, diversity, inclusion report. And what they've done is they've compared the different ethnic groups within the insurance industry versus the working population in the UK from the census, the last census that was done. So I'm just going to read off a few stats because I think this is quite interesting. So we have 67% people in the insurance industry that identify as white versus 81% that is a working population in the UK. 11% identify as Asian versus 10% working population. 7% identify as Black, African or Caribbean versus 4% in the UK. 7% also identify as mixed ethnicity versus 3% working age. And we have 3% who identify as other versus 2% in recorded as working age in the UK. Now, there's 5% that didn't want to disclose. But what those stats show us is when we look at ethnic minorities, we are recruiting more than the working population, which was not the case 3 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. We saw numbers such as 40% from a working age UK were from ethnic minority backgrounds, but that was not represented in the insurance industry. So we have made progress. But I think there's still a way to go because when we look at people that identify as white, we're looking at 67% in the industry versus 81% in the UK working population. So I think there is progress. I think there's lots that is available to companies to get engaged with to move that needle. We have regulations, we have the ethnic pay gap reporting, which it's not a regulation, but a lot of companies are adopting that. We have the gender pay gap report, which has been around for a few years, and companies are creating that and using the information from that to drive actions within the organization. I think partner networks such as, iCAN and signing charters such as the Race at Work Charter can all help organizations just navigate the complexity of, what actions, what metrics, how do we engage our colleagues. And then finally, there's a group called Rattle. I don't know if you're both aware of this group, but that's the Race Action through Leadership group. And they have brought together a number of C-suite from the insurance industry to set strategy and make this a conversation at that boardroom, in the executive meetings to say, this is important, here's the strategy, and this is how we need to implement that. So I think, if you just look at that data and you look at the tools that are available and the groups that are galvanizing around this effort, I think that's a great foundation. We've got all the tools. We're starting to make strides in the right direction. I think now we just need to turn up the heat.
Do you know what you've said that I have found both of you today really, really powerful, but also resonates with me, and I am from a British background? It's the specifics, right? So Bal, you mentioned I have grown up with a hierarchical understanding of respect and being able to, how you treat your elders or people in a position of authority. That was something that you brought into the workplace. Okay, and while it's I'm always going on at my kids for their lack of respect and hierarchical authority, it also can, when you are, just it can be detrimental to you progressing where you want to be, because you're not going, hey, I'm here, because that's not culturally appropriate, right? So those real specific nuances about how the playing field isn't level is so interesting. What can we do? What more can we do to get this message to the younger generations? Enam, you've mentioned about going into schools. What other, and you've mentioned the Gen Z movement. What else can we do?
To be fair, the overall viewpoint from that point of view is we need to change the perspective or perception of insurance. So when I say the word insurance, it's a call center, unethical, very much a big, slightly older white man in a suit doing his business. We need to change that view because that's not the representation. I said this once in front of about 200 children, secondary school kids, and it went down pretty well. At the same time, I'm slightly concerned and may sound very uncool, but we need to make insurance look sexy
Mm.
because it is sexy. And what I mean by that is, what is it that we want the next generation? When I look at my children, when I look at my, nieces, my nephews, or the young children that I mentor, is what do I want them to achieve? And more importantly, what is it they want to achieve? They want stability. They want the opportunity to travel. They want to become technical experts. They want to earn a lot of money. Insurance can cater that in many ways. There's so many different streams. It's about showing them that perception of insurance where it's not the call center, sit in the desk. It is me traveling around and meeting people like yourself, coming on to stuff like this, or attending the Gen Z conference, the Bieber conference, where I took 50 students from colleges, local colleges. They came out, and the feedback I got was it was amazing. It was so innovative. There were so many interesting things going on. It's that perception that we need to change their viewpoint on. And I think that is probably the overarching strategy, and everything else is action points.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Val, is there anything you want to add to that?
I mean, it's kind of difficult to follow that, isn't it? I think nailed it. I think the perception, I totally agree, is huge, right? And insurance is sexy. Let's just get comfortable with saying that. I think, right? Let's just put it out there. And I think when we talk about attracting the younger generation, I think we need to spend time thinking about what's important to them, as Enam just said. And the things the new generations are looking at companies for is things like corporate social responsibility. It goes a little bit beyond you've got a policy on your website. They're doing their research. They're looking at the things that you're saying, that you're putting out there, the actions you're taking, the events that you're part of, and I think that's very much coming into the focus for the new generation. And I think the companies are and will need to start spending more time and investment on that area to attract that new talent and retain the new talent. Because let's be honest, in my generation, you stuck at it and you had to have grit. And I admire the new generation now. If it doesn't fit and it doesn't sit well with their values and it's not the right culture, they're out of there. And I think that's very real. And I think, that adds to the talent wall we've got. It adds to the skills gaps we've got within insurance. And look, we're not just competing against each other for skills. The skills that we're looking for, the technology, the data analytics, the innovation, are also the same skills all the other industries are looking at as well. So the tech industry, the e-commerce industries. So we need to really put some effort and some money behind this, I think.
I, I probably just want to add to, bearing in mind, Bal and Sarah, you both, I believe, in like numbers. One of the sort of state of plays I mentioned to one of the universities I was at a couple of weeks ago was you look at stability and your future decisions. You want to go somewhere where you know you've got a future and it's not going to sort of deteriorate, not like the blockbuster where it suddenly vanish from the thin air. The UK general insurance market is a 55.9 billion pound market. and is projected to grow by at least 2% by up to 2027. In the current climate we're in, a growth of 2%, that is what, just over £1 billion. So it is a market in which we have demand. It is growing. And I'm only on about general insurance. We're not even touching the additional elements of insurance market where we have reinsurance, we have investments, etc. So, the potential to grow even in this current climate is there for us in the insurance market. So when I said that, you could see the students all looking around thinking, class, someone's mentioning something around positivity and growth rather than recession. It's a downfall, inflation, all this is impacting. We're actually in a field where even in COVID, we actually experience more positive results than negative compared to other fields within the UK economy. So I do think we need to go out and sell those, sort of features, benefits, and strengths that we have. And I think we will get the numbers through the doors.
I'm blown away by this. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Can I tell you what my key takeaways are? And then people listening, please feel free to let us know your key takeaways. Tell me what you think. I think changing the perception of insurance is what I'm hearing from you both is critical, because what we need to show is that insurance is growing, it's exciting, it's dynamic, it's diverse, and it is absolutely not boring. Okay, that's number one. Number two is, how do we do that? We do it through a multiple groups and movements and events, and bringing younger people to events to show them how cool this industry is and how diverse it is. Because at the moment, I think we're working across lots of different minorities, but in silos. We need to connect those more, and we need to be more overarching, over engaging, and just get everybody out there. That's my key takeaway from this. You guys are amazing. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.